think we're going to get started. We'll call people in and we'll ask you as we go today. We'll spend a lot of time in discussion, so we'll rearrange as we get started here. So the last couple weeks, we've been just talking about and having you think about how the church relates to our culture and how Christians should, in general, be thinking about the political environment that we're in and how we can participate. With this one more week before the holiday break, we decided we would just continue and do this one more time, continue on with a couple more topics that hopefully will spur discussion. I think as the elders, we feel we need to, one, learn to talk about these issues and even to disagree about these issues and to do it respectfully and informatively so we learn from each other. The second is that I think we would like to get a better feel from our congregation as to how the church should be moving in any particular directions, whether we should be, and if so, how we should be. So we look forward to your feedback this gives us an opportunity for that. So those are sort of the reasons that we decided to look at this as one of the big questions. And again, because it, I think, originally came from one of you in the congregation as we were putting these together. So what we're going to do today is spend our time talking about three different topics, a couple of them in culture and a couple of them in politics, and of course there's some crossover in there. So with that as the introduction, we'll just go ahead and start with the first of these questions. And this has to do with the idea of the church becoming a predominant or a much more heavily involved player in the general service and charity that our society needs. Now, traditionally, a long time ago, the American church was the primary source of charity and caring for the poor and the widowed. That has since been displaced by the government. And if you're reading this now, as our culture moves more and more in the direction of the secular, should the church think about using charity and service and making that a major focus for the way to, one, gain visibility, and two, to show Christ's love to the community, as opposed to what we might think of as more traditional evangelism. All right, so it's a broad question. And, could we imagine Red Cedar Church setting 30% of its budget or some large fraction of its budget for local charity? And would that be something we would think would be a meaningful way? I'm not proposing that. I'm just suggesting that might be, if you're looking for what do I mean by this, something that we could consider as a church body, and not only Red Cedar, but maybe the larger church in general. So that's the first.
Is it big enough for people to see, or do I need to run some copies? Can I get thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, I'll grab a few copies.
Okay. All right, so why don't we take, let's say, I think if we do 15 minutes 3 times today, we should be pretty good, and we'll leave some time. Maybe I'll give you 12 minutes or so, and then we'll take some time for some feedback. And again, if we don't get a lot of feedback finished and you have more to say, please find one of us. We'd love to talk about these issues further. So form up in groups of 4 to 8, something where everybody has a chance to talk. And you turn your chairs, do whatever, and we'll get back together, let's say, somewhere around 5 or 6 minutes before.
this evangelism thing. I think that it's, but could the church consider, I think they have some churches, the church and other will have similar magnitudes. The spirit of the opportunity of God caring for the spirit caring for that and not what's now things for churches. I think a lot of the questions about which are just being noted, but well, the government share is that something worthy of this. I think I think a lot of the political things that get like get hung up on when it comes to how we use our culture. I think that those things are supposed to have a conversation about God. Says, well, careful with how those communities are social. Because I think that more than I think that Jesus wouldn't care because there's other things. I would have showed them love. Now, all the cases that Jesus came across, the meal on, most of the big guys, I can't think of an example where Jesus came across something that he had an impact on our life that didn't. But I feel like he still would have. Well, I don't know. Think of a birthday if you would have interaction. Nobody's saying you can't ask. Now, there are issues with that. But the regular
So before we move on, any insights about this? Thoughts? Possible directions? I heard some very good feedback where I was sitting about, it's good for those of us who would go do charity. It's good to bring alongside people who may not be believers if we're going out to be of service in the community. It certainly can enhance visibility. Other thoughts that you had?
Yeah, right at the very end, I feel really strongly about the personal touch aspect of it. And the big charities where somebody gets to go and get their needs met, I don't think those are very effective at truly communicating that this is the love of Christ. And that this is, that, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't make people more curious about the Lord, whatever. But we need to get involved in things where the person knows us and can be spoken to about the love of Christ, and that's the reason we're doing it. So I don't know exactly what that would look like, but that's kind of how I feel we would want to approach it.
Good, that's good. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that meeting people's needs for food and shelter is important, and if we can help, I think that's a good thing. But I think even more is their spiritual need. And one of the ways that we need that is when people come through the door, if they come through our doors, because they have some interest in God, but some people know about Him, but they don't know Him. And so if they come through the door, what I like about this church is it's really hard to come in and leave and not talk to somebody. Okay, I mean, it really is true, and then just the way that you love people when they come through the door and make them feel welcome and get them hearing the gospel, I think is our biggest asset.
Good.
And I think what I brought up was you could work in the pantries that are available and to have that personal contact. So it's not that you can't do it, it's just that there are, whether it's the Salvation, they need volunteers for their pantry. There's, if you work at Youth Haven to help them with the children, there's that opportunity to interact with children and bring the gospel to them. If it's a personal touch that you're looking for, the City Rescue has it too. If you work in the women's or the men's facility, and you have an ability to interact with those people. First of all, is to bring what they do is to bring in food that's necessary to bring those people in, so you can talk to them. You still have to do that. That still has to happen.
And Bill, there was no intention here of saying we aren't doing a lot. You're doing an awful lot in the community, and you have been for a long time in service and in helping people, and that's greatly appreciated. And you saying there are immediate opportunities to do that is encouraging for me. So perhaps that's something we can think more about as we enter into the new year, is helping to fill those slots from those of us at Red Cedar who have time available. So anyway, thanks. All right, I'm going to turn over to Jeff, who has a next set of questions to talk about.
All right, so Dennis and I are bouncing back and forth a little bit between culture and politics. And I wanted to get a set of questions, not that this is something that we're trying to do, but something to kind of say, let's actually get some questions that will force us to wrestle through some difficult decisions. Now, that means that I've got a set of questions. There's 5 here. I don't want you to go through all 5 as a group. Pick 1 or 2 questions as a group. But the topic here is Church and Politics Red Cedar Edition. A lot of times it's easy to say, well, this is what we should do as a church as a whole, but, what do we do here? How does that look? And again, I'm not saying that any of these are things that we're going to do, but I want to wrestle through some of those concepts. What would this look like, or what could this look like in our local context? So grab 1 or 2 questions, wrestle through as a group.
10, 12 minutes.
Yeah, 10 or 12 minutes.
Some maybe, yes, no.
Well, you don't know what the background of the institution perspective. How do you talk about some of these? Or was it formal thing too?
And I think that's what this is asking.
It's like what issues should the church be
All right, your minute and 26 seconds has expired. So, can I ask which group's stuck on number one? Anyone on number one? All right, what did you have for answers for number one? Or for non-answers? What was that?
Go, Peter, go.
I think the tricky thing about the church being local and identifying principles that we should be kind of pushing for in the political realm is tricky, just because of the fact that I think with where the church is a bigger than just Red Cedar has kind of put its focus, a lot of these things are things that, yes, we believe are true and right, and or rather we should stay away from as Christians. But it's tricky to. I don't think the Bible expects. I don't think any examples in the Bible expect non-believers to act like believers. So I think that's the tricky thing that I think you have to find a balance. There's some things where, like, if it's a matter of life or death, we should be on the side of supporting life. But what does that mean in supporting life in general? Anyway, but that's another side of the thing too. But then there's other things where it's very much like how, like, the example that always comes to my mind is like when it comes to things with gay marriage and things like that. How can I expect people outside of the church to live according to the Bible? I believe that the Bible says it's one man and one woman within the confines of marriage, but how can I expect the world to live in that way? So should that be something that's my main thing that I'm pushing for politically? Should I be asking for laws for that? Or is that like me demanding other people fix their lives before they come to Christ? And I don't think that's how Christ works. So that's the thing where I think it would be good for the church to talk more about these things, but I think that there's fewer of them that the church should really have a hard stance on than I think the church as a whole has a hard stance on at the moment. Does that? Tell me why I'm wrong.
I don't think you're wrong.
Okay.
I think the different twist is, I don't think the church should be endorsing a candidate. I think the church should be educating members of these are the issues important to the church. Here's this candidate. Here's where this candidate stands on these issues. Here's this. Here's where these. So you decide what's important to you, but educating the members, I guess, is where people stand on what issues, and they make their own choices.
I agree. I think the complicated thing is that politicians just are people, and you're not going to agree with them 100%. You're never going to agree with any person 100%, and so it's always it's always. I can find some that we disagree on. I'm just saying that it's very hard to just black and white say to your congregation as a whole, like, this is who we should be voting for, when there are things that the church endorses that one candidate may support and other things that they might be opposed to.
But I don't know if I can get this out right. I'm not disagreeing with what you say, Peter, but I think the world will not always follow Christian principles. But if you look at societies as a whole, certain principles, God designed them to make a society actually function, not just from a Christian viewpoint, but like family structure. If the family disintegrates, society disintegrates. And so certain things, we can't expect a non-Christian to follow every single rule, but almost all cultures are based in some version of what's in the Ten Commandments, regardless of where they got that from.
And there's a difference too between saying this is where we as a church are versus you have to
Right.
follow this, right? It's one thing just to tell the world you have to obey our morals, but it's a very different thing to say, hey world, these are the morals by which we believe and why. There's a difference there. Paul.
To further complicate your example here. There's a difference between, in the political realm, wanting to say, for example, in the transgender, homosexual area, legislate morality. The problem is that when, in our current system, when something becomes approved by the government, then if you don't agree with that, you might lose your job because you will not say, I agree with it. And so somehow there's this tension between let pagans live like pagans. I mean, there's the issue of what that does to society as a whole, but that's one issue. The other issue is freedom of religion. And they're often in tension.
All right, so make sure we move on to other groups. Anyone address question number 2?
We talked about it. We did a lot of political issues or moral issues too.
All right.
Well, we got hung up a little bit on formally. We wondered, I don't know how to put this. We talked about a lot of things. Ultimately, the thing we should be talking formally about is the gospel. But that's an easy answer to that question. So, we said we would be comfortable with things like Rick reminding people during election season, these are the principles that we stand on. These are biblical teachings on freedom, respect for life, care for the poor. We would not be comfortable with the church formally saying, vote yes on the school levy or vote for Joe for,
We did that on Prop 3.
Yeah, I think that where the tension really comes in this question is the boundary between politics and faith is not firm.
Yeah,
So sometimes there are political issues which actually are issues of faith, and those things we should be addressing as a congregation. It would be inappropriate for us to just set those aside and we don't talk about politics. So where that line falls, I don't know. That's above my pay grade.
Prop 3 was the abortion.
A quick thought on that. I feel like it's particularly unfair and unjust when you read a statement that says you need to keep your faith out of politics, right? Because the reality is if you just substitute worldview, nobody would disagree with that, right? Of course your worldview should inform your politics. So why wouldn't, if you have a faith-based worldview, why wouldn't that? So just kind of as a, I don't know, kind of a way to think through that. I mean, to me, that's different from formal, right, instruction or whatever, but of course your worldview, your faith should inform your political thought.
All right, number 3. Maybe we do this one by vote. No.
I brought up in our discussion that I remember a year or two ago when Georgia was reforming their election laws, they had early voting for a number of years, but one of the things they were going to do away with was early voting on Sunday. A lot of churches objected because it was part of their tradition we go to church Sunday morning and then we all go to the polls together.
So that's where this question came from, because I remember the same thing.
I don't know that I would do all go to the polls together. I would, yeah, because I would spread out like a potluck after that.
I would,
Ben.
But making sure people have rights to go vote and want to go vote, then
yes, absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. My challenge, I've always said, is if someone wasn't going to vote until you told them to go vote, then they're not well informed enough that I want them to vote. I'm sorry. I want people who know what they're voting about. So if we're not going to formally instruct people in the church in some way of what
So
to
we have to do
vote
number
on,
one before.
then I don't think we
number
should
three.
encourage people to go vote.
All right, how about number four?
List of every election.
Anyone, number four? Yeah.
Number four, I think we should certainly encourage people to get involved. You know, as someone who's run for office before, it's good to be able to speak the truth and love to our neighbors and get out there and do that, be a part of it. Many of you were a part of that, and I thank you for that. So I think it's very important to have Christian witness in our government, and it's also foundational to how our government was founded. A lot of Christians, a lot of pastors and priests were involved in that, so I think we should certainly not shy away from that. I think at times the Christian culture has gotten into politics a lot and then retreated and then gotten into it again. I think it's important to be engaged and be a part of it and let our gospel witness be present. And you know, there are some issues that we might have to take a pragmatic approach because we are dealing with the world, but at the same time, we should be out there and be a light in the government. So I would strongly encourage people to do that.
I would go along with that because if we're not inputting into our political realm what our Christian beliefs stand for, then our politics are going to degrade from where our Christian beliefs stand. Whereas if we are there at least to give some input, then, you know, if we're brave enough to stand up and say, hey, I believe this, then there's probably other people in the crowd that are going to agree with that, but they're not strong enough to stand up and state it in the first place. And therefore, now, if we weren't there, the poll shows that, oh, it's unanimous, we should go this way. And now, well, no, it's not unanimous, because people have stated their opinion now and been open to it.
All right, I'm gonna take 5 very briefly and then turn this back over to Dennis because I've taken too long.
It's okay. Keep going.
Keep going?
Keep going.
All
Keep
right,
going, 'cause I
number
have a
5.
question.
Did anyone resolve number 5?
Resolve? No. Discuss?
These guys talked about it.
All right, tell me what you talked about.
No, you don't want me to.
Yeah.
I'm a stick in the mud on this.
All right,
one.
we're gonna
Sorry.
stick in the mud. Good.
Do we all believe the first half of that?
Yeah, I know, I mean, my kids take government in school, it teaches you how the government works, is that what the question's asking?
Well, does it teach God's purpose and God's place in government?
Oh, for sure, no.
Okay, good.
It
All right.
doesn't teach how the government
It does
functions,
teach
works.
what government,
Okay.
it teaches functionality, not purpose. And feel free to push back on that.
Okay.
What?
I thought they had cut that out.
Okay. Stick in the mud.
No, I mean, we had a discussion about the American government system, and I'm just a little bit, don't hate me, but I'm a little bit hesitant to say that it's the best system. It's a perfectly fine system. It's great, but I'm a little bit, I just get anxious about that. Now, but what I do think is equipping people to serve, to live, to all of these things within the government. I think that as a church, that's perfectly fine. I'm just a little bit, I don't want the church to become just too Americanized. I don't want it to be I just get nervous about that, I think, so.
Yeah, it's a hard line to value pieces and not, and to also say that we need to be able to do things that are true throughout all of history.
So should evangelicals in Italy be doing the same thing? Should evangelicals in Africa and countries be doing the same? If our system's the best, should they be teaching, how do we navigate that? I don't know, but I don't want us to have a focus that's
Yeah.
too focused.
Abe?
Yeah, I guess I didn't think too American about this question, other than that's the culture that we happen to live in. But I would say, sure, if we were a church in Ethiopia, then we'd be wrestling with how do we get our children to think about participating in that form of
I'm cool with
government
that.
as a Christian.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's not that we're trying to
Yeah.
spread Americanism. I think the question had more to do with how do you get involved in civic
There you go.
government?
Then maybe we don't disagree.
Teaching kids how the government works so they can inject their values into the system, I guess.
I can get there.
And do we, as a follow-on, do we spend time with our youth connecting Scripture and the gospel with the functionality of the American government and both the history, tradition, and common values that we would hope the American government and Scripture proclaim.
And biblical principles behind what's in our government document.
Which perhaps increasingly kids are not seeing in
Yeah.
school, right?
So now let me poke into where this question came from. Does anyone know the purpose of the first Sunday schools? Sunday school started off, what was its intent?
Memory work. No, I'm just kidding.
What?
I said memory work, but no.
Well, it was after the war, right, World War II?
I'm not
The
gonna remember
40s?
the year. But the start was that it was intended to teach children how to read. Because they were working in factories, they did not have the opportunity to learn to read. It was purely functional. Let's teach kids what they're not getting. And we're gonna do so in such a way that we're teaching them how to read with Bible stories. But it's the church, I think historically, the church has had a great deal of impact on culture because we have been big on education. And what that looks like. So that's where that.
So it really was Sunday school.
It really was Sunday school, that's right. And I'm not saying that we get rid of Bible stories and do math. I'm just saying. So,
Also, I think if we're in the world, we talked a little bit about Christian worldview
Yeah.
and worldly worldview. And I think it's important if you're going to school, if you're going to a Christian school, you don't necessarily maybe not fully aware of what the worldview is out there. And
Yes.
if you are Christian,
Educate
you're
both.
going
Yeah.
to a public school, how do you stand firm in your faith, in love, and work that into the worldview and maybe not work it into, but like work alongside and be a witness to Christ in the things you do and say. And how does that look as you grow in your part of the world? You've got to use your faith.
yeah.
And so have our kids be prepared to know that there's other views out there and why they believe what they believe and how that looks in life.
Yeah. Diana, last word, and then I'm gonna wrap us up.
I think American civics was such a long time ago that I think adults would benefit from reminders.
Yes. All right, so I want to wrap us up in two ways real fast. As I was walking around the groups, Ben, I'm going to put you on the spot, made a great comment that in our current culture is set up to talk about politics as war. If one side says something is true, the other side goes, ha-ha, I'm going to fight you on that, regardless of what they actually believe, right? It's set up in that way. And one of the things that I think that we can do as a church is being able and willing to talk about these things in non-confrontational ways. I think that would be very stark in the conversations that I've had where I don't feel threatened or antagonistic towards someone. I think that's a great aspect of what our Christian witness can be. So let me wrap this up with a quote from Wayne Grudem and then a final piece. Wayne Grudem says, "To be able to vote is having a share in ruling power. Therefore, all citizens who are old enough to vote have a responsibility before God to know what God expects of civil government and what kind of moral and legal standards he wants a government to follow. How can citizens learn what kind of government God is seeking? They can learn this only if churches teach about government and politics from the Bible." And so he's the author of A Systematic Theology. This is his book here. But he ends his book in kind of a nice way, which is he says, look, there's three things that we really want to happen. One is we want people's hearts to change so that they seek good and not evil. Two, we want people's minds to change so that their moral convictions align more closely with God's moral standards. And three, we want the nation's laws to change so that they fully encourage good conduct. How do you get those three? Well, evangelism, personal conversations, i.e. culture change, which is what Dennis talked about, and through Christian political involvement, which is what we've been talking about, or what I've been kind of talking about. So, he makes the argument that all three of those are necessary components. It's not one or the other, it's kind of all three. I want to say thank you. The conversations I've heard today have been wonderful. So I